Good evening, everyone. I'm Keith Watley, and I get to welcome you to Uncommon Heroes 2021. We got more than 370 of you registered for tonight's event, representing some of our former clients, their family members, our family members, partner organizations, and new and longtime supporters of our work at Uncommon Law. If you're streaming this on either Facebook Live or YouTube, I encourage you to take a second, drop your name and where you're joining us from in the comments section. And for those who are representing loved ones who are currently in prison, I encourage you to share their name so they can be as present with us here tonight as possible. One downside to this virtual format is that you don't get to meet and mingle with the incredible staff and the board of directors and other volunteers we have driving our work at Uncommon Law. We have expanded our staff quite a bit over the past couple years, and we've hired 8 people who have come home from life sentences and a number of others who've been directly impacted by incarceration. So we look forward to having you meet more of the team tonight and when we get to be together again in person sometime in the future. There are a number of sponsors who've helped make this event possible, and we warned them that I was going to share their names with you tonight because we think it's important that you know who they are. They include Rosenbein Galvan Grunfeld, Logical, the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights, J.K. Irwin Foundation, the Next Fund, Kotchett, Petrie, and McCarthy, Baker McKenzie, the Ben and Jenny Overman Foundation, facilitated by Ben Ringler and Jenny Overman, Amity Foundation, Jim Maloney, the Scott family, the Norman Welchman family, Megan Comfort, the Cole family, Timothy and Diana Fitzpatrick, Kazan McLean, Alan Ramo and Leslie Rose, Heising Simons Foundation, Rob and Olga Eber, and NIA Impact Capital. One of our longtime supporters is sadly no longer with us. Mike Brady was a bulldog of a friend, a truth teller, and a fighter for what's right at the local and state levels for many years. Mike passed away just a few weeks ago, and he's sorely missed at this event and the rest of our lives. I offer a very special thanks to Justin Bench and Adamu Chan. They're the ones responsible for the video content you've seen promoting tonight's event, and you'll see more of that tonight. Justin has been documenting our journey for several years now, and Adamu is a filmmaker working to tell the story of his time at San Quentin during the worst COVID outbreak there. And the main architect really in getting us all here and the person who's on the ones and twos backstage for us tonight is Annie Rogue, our development and communications manager at Uncommon Law. Uncommon Heroes always serves 2 main purposes. First, it's to welcome home those who we've worked with and have been released from their life sentences in the past year. And in this past year, we're welcoming home another 20 of our clients, which is pushing our grand total toward 300 at this point. They include people like Christina, who left a life without parole sentence and now has a good job and is training to be a drug counselor. People like Lonnie, who was already mentoring and training young people during his 45 years in prison, is now doing the same thing out here. Or like C. Dang, who now works with us at Uncommon Law, guiding others on the pathway home. They also include Michael Harris, who spent more than 30 years in prison, most of it for a crime he didn't commit. And we've got folks like Ben Vo, who the governor handed over to ICE, so he's stuck in immigration detention. So these are some of the things we've allowed justice to look like for way too long. To those 20 folks who we've welcomed home in the last year, and so many more who spent years or decades in prison and have recently come home, we say welcome home to you, and welcome to Uncommon Heroes. The second purpose of Uncommon Heroes is to recognize some of the people doing the critical work, often without very much fanfare or recognition, to bring our folks home. And tonight's Uncommon Heroes are Senator Sidney Kamlager and Jamelia Land. And we're grateful they're allowing us to honor them tonight. Our theme for this event is Justice Done Differently, which describes our belief that we need a system that prioritizes healing instead of punishment and harm, and that provides pathways home from prison, even for those who committed serious and violent crimes. But Justice Done Differently also is a call to action to our colleagues, to our supporters, and to those we're just now meeting. We need to stop acting like it's okay to accept the crumbs being offered to us. Instead, we want to work together and build a new table from which we can all be nourished. We've been too content tinkering around the edges, while the discretionary parole process remains the greatest contributor to mass incarceration that nobody talks about. We've enacted laws that require the parole board to consider that someone was too young when they got a life sentence, or they're too old now, or they are survivors of intimate partner violence, or they've participated in certain programs in prison. We've got people who check all those boxes, but they still get denied parole because they're Black, or they're transgender, or they can't afford to hire an attorney to represent them in their parole hearings. We are, in this state, scheduling some 7,000 parole hearings every year, but only 16% of those hearings result in parole grants. We celebrate when the governor commutes a handful of sentences, but we stay silent when he blocks parole for political reasons, or when he sends people to be deported instead of home with their families. We thank the governor or the parole board when they release our folks from prison because they're exceptional. But this exceptionalism, this respectability parole is always going to disadvantage Black folks, people with low wealth, those with intellectual differences, and those without political connections. So at Uncommon Law, Justice Done Differently means we tell the truth about all this, and we demand something fundamentally different for the 45,000 or so people subject to this system in California, and for the 200,000 plus across the country who are serving life sentences. And we need your help. We need you to join us in this effort. So I'm going to warn you 3 times tonight, I'm going to encourage you to make a donation to support us in doing justice differently. You can do that by scanning the QR code that's on the screen shortly. And we're also going to, in the comments section, we'll include a link to our donation page so that you can click there if you prefer to do it. You will see from the screen right now, we have a goal here of $200,000. We've already raised $98,000. So we're almost halfway there, as you can see. Now, it may look strange that you see 2 donations, and that's just because we set up the page by entering 1 donation from all of our sponsors, whom I mentioned earlier, and another lump donation from all of you who chose to make a gift when you registered for the event. And so for the old school folks who prefer to send a check, we like that too. You can do that by dropping a check in the mail. And what we would ask is that you can also tonight drop a quick email to us at events@uncommonlaw.org. Tell us the amount that you're pledging so we can track it on this page. We'll come back to this page later. I will give you a heads up that we've got a pledge from our board of directors. They always come through for us. They have committed to matching up to $24,000 that we raised tonight. So let's see if we can close this gap and get us to 200,000. Now, before I stop talking for a little while, I'm going to introduce Damian Johnson. Damian joined our staff this year after having been an Uncommon Law client and after lecturing me on parole law for more than 10 years. Damian's mom, Ann Johnson, was one of the very first UnCommon Heroes we had a few years ago, where she represented the mothers and others holding their families together while supporting and advocating for their loved ones inside. Take it away, Damien.
Well, hello, everybody. Like Keith said, my name is Damian Johnson. I'm a legal assistant at UnCommon Law. I also served 35 years in prison on a 15 years to life sentence for second-degree murder. You might be wondering why I'm wearing this hoodie. Well, it's a statement. Not a fashion statement, but a political statement. Imagine that. The simple act of wearing an article of clothing is considered a radical act. But I come from a long list of people who spoke volumes by their appearances. From my grandmother, who had the audacity to wear her natural afro at a time when it was not respectable to do so for a Negro, to my mother, who not only wore her natural afro, but also was not afraid to dress herself and her children in Black Panther gear. What am I saying by wearing this hoodie? Well, I am that nigga. I recently reread Professor Armour's book, Nigga Theory, and was struck by the parallels between my experience and that of our keynote speaker's father. From my tiny cell in solitary confinement, I learned the power of words to transform circumstances. Similar to the elder Armour, I, with only the inside of a pen, few sheets of paper, and the logbooks provided by the warden, was able to resurrect myself from what was to be a living death, reserved for people like me, the others, the niggas. Parallels aside, what struck me the most about Professor Armour's nigga theory is that it provides a blueprint for doing exactly what many reformists and abolitionists only dream about: rethinking our moral compass, like what we think about Black men wearing hoodies, to make deep and lasting cuts in racialized mass incarceration. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to introduce my nigga, Professor Jody Armour.
Damian Johnson, thank you so much. I'm really humbled by that introduction, and I hope I can live up to it in the remarks I'm going to share with you this evening. This is a moment of grace for me. It's coming full circle. You know my story. I lost my dad. Lonnie, by the way, man, we got to talk, but I was at your, parole hearing, I was ready to speak, but they only so many that they could get in. Man, my heart. But, I lost my dad as an 8-year-old to prison 22 to 55 for possession and sale of marijuana. And he was one of them uppity Negroes. Back then, they called them niggas, just like today, who was going to do that full 55. Not, no good time credits. He was one of them kind of niggas, all right? Back to what you were saying and getting at, Damien. So the next time I was standing with him upright was in Cincinnati, 5 years later, when he was arguing before the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals. En banc hearing, literally for his life, pro se. He had written, and I talked about it in the book, but you don't get the chance to see it like we can in the virtual world. The silver lining in this virtual world is I can show you some things that I can only describe in the book. Here is the typewriter. Here is the typewriter that my dad used, this Royal manual typewriter that he used on his cell floor, typing out late into the night, his own writs of habeas corpus, representing himself, like I said, pro se up through the state system and federal system, and winding up 5 years later with me standing next to him in the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals in Cincinnati as a 14-year-old now. And I teach his case in my criminal law course, Armour versus Salisbury, which stands for the, you would have thought, very matter-of-fact proposition, but his case had to help establish this, that it was a denial of a defendant's due process for the state through its prosecutor to deliberately and intentionally lie to the jury to secure a conviction. So that's what his case represented, but that's not his case, drug offender, nonviolent drug offender. his kind of facts are not the kind of facts that account for many of the folk who are locked up in prisons and jails too, but especially I'm focusing on prisons right now. Contrary to what Michelle Alexander said in her very important book, The New Jim Crow, her 2010 book that helped people start to think about mass incarceration as a social justice problem and not just a problem of bad people making bad choices. So, nothing but love and respect for that. But she had at the heart of her book a factual misstatement. She said we went from 300,000 prisoners, people in prison in 1980 to 2.2 million by the time you get to the mid-aughts by the arrest and conviction of a lot of low-level nonviolent drug offenders. That she said it repeatedly as a go-to argument. The vast majority locked up, low-level nonviolent drug offenders. Well, as John Fassis points out, the professor from Fordham wrote a book, Locked In, goes in, looks at the numbers, the statistics, and when you look at the state population of prisoners, which is where 87% of prisoners reside, is in the state prisons, not in the federal system, 87% in the state system. In that system, only 5 to 6% at most of the prisoners, people in prison, can be characterized as low-level nonviolent drug offenders or anything like that. So the vast majority, really, of folks that we got to reach and have people think about fundamentally differently aren't just low-level nonviolent drug offenders, because yes, you can accommodate them with your conventional moral framework that we have now, rooted in retribution, retaliation, revenge, the one that we've been accustomed to for a long time. But if you're going to say, because, and that's what our argument is, low-level nonviolent drug offenders are just, who of us isn't a sinner? Who hasn't, committed misdemeanors and peccadillos and all that? No, what we're talking about when you're talking about violent offenders is now having to challenge people to move away from a moral framework rooted in retribution, retaliation, and revenge, which is the moral framework, the moral compass we've used in criminal justice matters for the last 45, 50 years. Straight. California made it real clear when I went down to San Pedro, Terminal Island, and saw all the asphalt down there and said, well, why is all the asphalt out, not a parking lot? They said people came and saw there was grass and trees out there, and they said, well, prisoners shouldn't be seeing grass and trees. They're supposed to be suffering punishment. So they uprooted the trees and paved over the grass. So when you think of retribution, retaliation, and revenge as the moral framework, the conception of justice that's driving you to put people behind these prison walls, then you're going to think about it very differently than if you view it as a matter of restoration, rehabilitation, and redemption. If you recognize that the possibility of personal redemption and rehabilitation and restoration as well are ever present in human nature and in human beings. Once you embrace that moral framework, you have to reject that other one and shun it and push it as far away as possible. And so, in talking about the violent offenders that are caught up in our criminal justice system and the different kind of moral framework that we have to adopt to make sure that they see justice done differently. That the justice done differently we're talking about is the different conception of justice, one rooted in redemption, rehabilitation, and restoration. Rather than the way the justice has historically been done, right? For the last 40, 50 years around here, retribution, retaliation, revenge. So they're just competing conceptions of justice, folks, right? And the retribution, retaliation, revenge conception, moral framework has been dominant. I've been writing about this stuff for 25 years. Man, they've been rolling me over with it. Jackie Lacey here, a USC graduate, my own law school. Black woman, DA, she prosecuted a 25-year-old black boy who went in the back seat of a car and took a cell phone as an 18-year-old. Unoccupied car, took a cell phone from its unoccupied back seat. 2 years earlier, as a 16-year-old, he was found guilty of 2 purse snatching incidents. She got 25 to life on him for that. because that's how people thought 15 years ago, 20 years ago. It was routine. Chris Rock was going back and forth. I love black people, but I hate niggas. And everybody was laughing. And then for his core definition of a nigga was any black person who's done a crime. You know, meaning that up to 90% of young black males in some of these inner city neighborhoods are going to wind up in jail on probation or on parole at some point in their lives, or by his definition, niggas. And we're all laughing at that punchline because that's how we thought back then. Right? When Hillary Clinton was talking about super predators, a lot of black people were saying that in the 90s too, about our own youth, about ourselves, right? Because we were embracing a moral framework rooted in retribution, retaliation, revenge, respectability politics. Don't confuse us with them. Let's distinguish and distance good Negroes from bad Negroes. There was a whole ethos. And right now, the Overton window is shifted. You know, you have somebody like Garcon and Krasner, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, who was just reelected, by the way. Chesa Boudin, Krasner got over 80% of the black vote in Philadelphia the second time around. Chesa Boudin up in San Francisco, they are coming with an alternative moral framework, and they're not just coming with it. Voters voted for them, knowing they were embracing this alternative moral framework. They knew Larry Krasner had never prosecuted a case in his life, had only been a public defender and defense attorney his whole life, and his platform was in mass incarceration, in cash bail, and address police misconduct. And 75% of the voters in the general election in the first time around voted for him, knowing all of that. So the voters have started to move their conception of justice over the last 5, 6, 7 years, and it's been jaw-dropping. But there's this constant pull the other way. And we see it's coming back. You know, we saw the folks in the streets 2 summers ago, and we were talking about Black Lives Mattering and systemic racism. And now critical race theory is any mention of inclusion, diversity, and equity. Oh, you're talking critical race theory. Don't talk about anything having to do with racial justice or it's critical race theory. So there's been a real backlash. And this what we're talking about right now, how we think about justice, is going to continue to be a critically important part of this conversation. And let me just wrap my remarks up by pointing to very quickly, you're back on in, okay, very quickly, how I've incorporated art into this project. I did a play called Race, Rap, and Redemption. I'm going to do another one that asked the following question. Back to San Quentin, Lonnie. Stanley Tookie Williams had just been put to death when Arnold Schwarzenegger had denied his petition for stay on grounds that Stanley Tookie Williams had not achieved personal redemption. That was literally what he wrote in the letter. He used that as the legal criterion. He said, I'm taking this criterion, applying it to you. You haven't achieved personal redemption, so you're going to be executed by the state. And I asked in the audience, there's 1,100 people in Bovard Auditorium, the call of the question for the evening was, should we pour liquor for Tookie? That is, should we engage in a libation ceremony, pour libations, express ritualistic solidarity with somebody who killed people? He was a murderer. Okay, he says, I didn't, these particular people know, but I have done things. And he co-founded the Crips, okay? Right? And a lot of people said, well, for that reason, off with his head. I don't want to hear it, right? Our question for the evening was, should we pour liquor for Stanley Tookie Williams? Should we engage in this libation ceremony and call his spirit and unify around something that he represents that's important to us? And the way that I made this case, I knew just lawyerly arguments weren't going to do it, was through art. I have, basically exhibit A, B, C, D, E, F, as I'm making a closing argument, right? And there's 1,100 jurors, right? And each exhibit A, B, C, D, E, F, and G was a live artistic performance by people like Saul Williams, Maida DeValier, Macy Gray's Youth Orchestra doing Lift Every Voice and Sing in both a straight ahead and hip hop version. Lula Washington's Dance Company doing a modern dance to Tupac Shakur's Brenda's Got a Baby, about a 12-year-old black girl who's raped and has a baby, and her community turns their back on her, so she winds up turning to prostitution. The last couplet says, prostitute found slain, and Brenda's her name. She had a baby. We asked, what if that baby Brenda had was Stanley Tukey Williams? And he goes into the foster care system, and he's being disciplined. You know how horrible that system often can be. Disciplined by being thrown in car trunks and having slammed on him when he's 3 and 4 for discipline, cigarette burns, molestation. How are we going to judge him? And so we had live performances culminating with Ice Cube doing his stuff from NWA to the present, and using rap and art as a form of an alternative narrative, because rappers were able to penetrate pop culture with this alternative narrative. People like Pac, Nas, Cube, and Hov, the so-called gangster rappers, were able to say, you're calling us the N-words, because we've been getting involved in criminal activity. Well, let's give you the world from our perspective, from the so-called N-words perspective. Let's penetrate pop culture with our perspective. And by the end of that evening, if you look at that videotape that's online, you see almost all 1,100 people, students, faculty, staff, standing up with lighters in the air for Stanley Tukey Williams, in solidarity with Stanley Tukey Williams, because that's the power of art. That's the power of art to bond us with people who sometimes we would otherwise. So I'll stop there because I think I'm running out of time, and go on with the rest of the show. Thanks so much, Keith.
Thank you so much, Professor Armour, for sharing such a powerful and provocative perspective. I've been listening to the audio version of the book, and I've flagged at least 10 or 12 passages so far that I'm going to come back to. Such an important framing and lens to look at our current situation, and where we think some of the solutions might be, about how we create something different. So I look forward to hearing more from you when you join our panel discussion in a little while. But before we do that, I want to take a moment to mention a special award this year. We have Uncommon Heroes and an Uncommon Hero Award. We have a special one this time, and it's in honor of one of the few mentors I've had as an attorney and an advocate in this work. His name is Michael Satras. He passed away last year. Michael founded an organization called the Prison Law Office back in the 1970s. And he went on to be lead counsel in dozens of published cases that really shaped the landscape for people serving life sentences. And he did it all with style and tenacity, but also with love and compassion and a willingness to show others how to be effective advocates. So I'm going to be joined on the screen here by Lily Paratori, who's our managing attorney at UnCommon Law. And I originally brought Lily here under false pretenses. I told her she was going to be put to work tonight, and she showed up ready for duty. But in reality, Lily, you're the recipient of our very first Michael Satras Unbreakable Spirit Award. And I want you to see why. There's reasons for this. Here's why.
Hi, this is TC. I'm one of the statistics of domestic violence and sexual abuse resorted to the means that were illegal to end it. When I was in prison for almost 32 years, I didn't know if I'd get out. I didn't have a release date, but I had hope. And I also had one more thing. I had an angel on my side. I had Lily Paratori.
When I was incarcerated, my name was Lynn Noyes. It's now Lynn Acosta. I had 2 concurrent 25 to life terms.
My name's C. Dang. I've been incarcerated for 25 years, nearly 25 years.
My whole name is Amtul Hakeem Anderson. I was incarcerated in 1996 at the age of 15. I've did 24 years and 5 months.
My name is Lonnie Morris. I recently released from prison after serving a sentence of 7 years to life, in which I did 44 years in prison.
If I could tell you one thing about Lily, is she is Wonder Woman in the flesh. She will give 110% for whomever she's working for.
She's a huge pack of dynamite in a little bitty body. She doesn't give up. That's one thing. She represented me in total 3 times. She's going to see me out, basically, is what she said. And that struck something inside of me and made me really want to switch gears and continue pressing.
When I first met Lily, she looked really young to me, and I was questioning her ability to take on a case like mine. And I said to her, hey, I don't know if you're ready to take on a case like this. She said to me, if you let me, I'll stay and fight for you until I get you out of prison.
Even when I was going through talking about some of the roughest, raw, real things, she was there, and I felt she provided for me a safe and secure environment to just be as open and raw as I needed to be.
Being locked up all those years, not knowing how I was going to get out, you said, I believe you. TC, I believe you. And that's all it took for me to keep fighting.
I remember what she said, you know, it's just like, we're gonna go through this together. Regardless of what happened, you know, she won't give up. And I believe her, I trust her. And her words, she kept her words.
My favorite memory of Lily is seeing her on the other side of the gate when I paroled.
The day I walked out of San Quentin State Prison and I greeted her and she gave me a big hug and I was able to give her a big hug. That's my favorite memory. The look on her face and the look that I had, you know, I think it said it all. Since I've been out of prison, I think the one thing been the most inspiring to me, the most heartfelt to me, is the work that I do with young people at Open Tech High School.
I've been applying myself, improving and sharpening my life skills, but I owe her to continuously be my absolute best self, to succeed beyond success, and to give back in whatever way that I possibly can.
For each one of us that you helped get out of prison, today we can look into this camera and we can say, I am somebody. I'm doing big things.
A couple of months after I came home, I was like very blessed and grateful to be able to be part of UnCommon Law and UnCommon Law family. To me, it's like a dream to me. It's a dream come true. You know, a job that I always wanted, you know, a job that gave me the opportunity to give back. With Lily, you know, it's like she gave me a second chance in life. You know, I'm sitting here, I'm doing things that I'm doing largely because Lily, you know, she did that.
Lily, if I can tell you just one thing without being emotional, is the gratefulness that and appreciation I feel towards you is immeasurable, and I am a better person for having met you and having our paths crossed in life.
You are not just my attorney, you are my friend. You're my warrior, you're my angel. And I love you, man, I love you.
You earn every bit of it. You earn every single recognition, acknowledgement. And I know how humble you are, but you deserve this. You really deserve this, Lily. We love you.
Lily, I love you, I respect you, and I admire you. And I appreciate that you're getting this reward that is long overdue. So enjoy it, and again, love you, my friend.
Well, Lily, you know, you've been such a bright, shining light since you first came to us at UnCommon Law about 7 years ago. You know, not only have you helped to develop and organize and really articulate our model of advocacy, but you've really, you know, exemplified the kind of zealous, relentless, and innovative approach that really makes us and our clients successful. You know, although we've seen now hundreds of our clients come home from their life sentences, and I always say they got themselves out of prison. and that's true. But there are a few exceptions. Lonnie Morris is one of them. Your partnership with him and your combination of strategic litigation, organizing, and advocacy are really the main reasons he came home after 45 years. Congratulations on being our first recipient of the Michael Satras Unbreakable Spirit Award. I know you weren't expecting this, so you don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but we'd love to hear anything you want to share.
Thank you so much, Keith. I don't have prepared remarks. That's probably a good thing for all of you, but I'll just say I'm deeply grateful and humbled and inspired by every person I work with every day. And watching that video, it's hard not to feel the emotion. And the reason why we do this work is to bring more folks home. And I'm deeply, deeply grateful for all the people who've let me into their life to partner on a journey home through a system that was set up for folks to fail in. So I'm deeply grateful. I'm humbled. I'm at a loss for words, but thank you so much, Keith, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Lily. Thanks for letting us honor you in this way. I know you never would have agreed to it if I give you any warning.
Unfortunately not. Thank you so much, Keith.
Thanks, Lily. So I told you that you're going to see some things that we think might move you. This is the second time I told you I mentioned that we were going to invite you to make a donation. I think the statements you saw in the video and heard in the video give you a sense of how we support people who are seeking a way home from prison. If you can see on the screen, we have once again shown the tracker, which shows we're over the 100,000 mark now. Quite a few more donations have come in. Thank you so much for those who've given already. I invite you to do that again. Again, you can scan the QR code with the camera on your phone, or you can go to click the link that will be in the comment section so you can make a donation at our website. And as I mentioned, we have a board of directors that's matching the first $24,000 we raised tonight. So every dollar counts, and we really you can see what we do with the resources you provide us. As I was listening to Professor Armour and Damien, I realized I didn't provide enough context for the conversation, for Professor Armour's remarks. His book is sometimes called Nigga Theory. Other times it's called N*GGA theory. And it talks about that term and how it's been used in the past to dehumanize and justify criminalizing Black folks, especially young Black men and boys, and how there are different ways to view it, to use it, depending on who's using it and people's comfort level with it. But I realize it's also, it's a triggering term for a lot of people. So I regret not giving you that warning that it was something that might be discussed tonight. I didn't know exactly what Professor Armour would say, but I know what his book is about. So we appreciate him sharing his perspective and his comments. And I also just think about how his dad's story in particular really resonates with me and reminded me of Damien's story, because I told you Damien was for many years lecturing me on parole law. And can you imagine him doing it in that voice you heard? Yeah, I learned pretty quickly, but the regaining control over the narrative about who we are, who we can be, what's possible for us, I think is what that conversation can be about. So we are going to now get to the Uncommon Heroes that we have already previewed for you, and I'm going to invite to join me The first hero is Jamelia. Now, a number of years ago, a man named Samuel Brown invited me to meet with a group of he'd formed inside New Folsom State Prison. He had convinced the librarian there to give him some space in the library to gather people where they could talk about their journeys to prison and their pathways home. And he wanted me to help them understand how to succeed at the parole board. And more recently, I learned about a woman with a similar vision, intensity, and commitment. And her name is Jamelia Lamb. She's the chair of the California Abolition Act Coalition, a national partnership coordinator at the Abolish Slavery National Network, executive board member at March On, and an active member in really a number of other community efforts. And she just happens to be married to Samuel. And I'll let him tell you more.
This call and your telephone number will be monitored and recorded.
Well, amazing. Half woman, half amazing. All Jamelia Land. You know, Jamelia Land, the sister with the flag draped over her shoulders, the beautiful, unsuspecting face, and the intelligent eyes that smolder with a burning desire for change because she didn't listen when the broken spirits told her, "You're too small. You're just a girl." Every time they threw dirt on her, she shook it off and stood on top of it until she was 10 feet tall and changing the world. Uncommon hero, champion of the forgotten, the marginalized, the oppressed, the system impacted, the downtrodden. No cape, no lair, no secret symbol in the air. But when the people are treated unfair and filled with despair, Jamelia will be there, standing with them on the city blocks, demanding accountability for killer cops, marching for community violence to stop. And she does it all because this is just who she is. So keep your props, keep your profits, because her soul can't be sold. You are now witnessing the oh-so-special vessel filled with the celestial ancestral power of Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells, Harriet Tubman, that refuses to sit in the face of injustice and just do nothing. In the footsteps of the great, she follows, while paving her own legendary path for the revolutionaries and freedom fighters of tomorrow, fighting mass incarceration through legislation in the state and across the nation. She's an activist, a mother, a wife, the irrefutable, indisputable, absolute love of my life. And she is amazing. All woman and all amazing for the torch that she is carrying and the trail that she is blazing. Congratulations, baby. You are my uncommon hero.
So now you've encountered Samuel Brown, and we get to now meet Jamelia. Welcome to the stage, Jamelia. I want to.
Can you hear me okay?
Is she coming?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
One of us is having an issue. Hopefully it's not me.
I'm here.
Jamelia, you were there a minute ago.
I'm here.
Well, she will be joining us shortly. And while we get her, I'm gonna introduce our other uncommon hero, and we'll bring them both on at the same time. The other person we're honoring tonight is State Senator Sydney Kamlager. She represents the 30th Senate District, which covers much of the Los Angeles area. She's worked on issues that involve healthcare equity, criminal justice reform, housing, strengthening environmental protections, community-based alternatives to policing, gang enhancements, and support for violence survivors. So if we ask the question, why is she an uncommon hero? Well, those are plenty of reasons, but we've got a video of some folks who've gotten to know her and admire her work, and we'll hear what they have to say.
Hi, I'm Mark Philpart. I'm based in Oakland and work at PolicyLink.
My name is Esteban Nunez. I am the State Policy Director for the Anti-Recidivism Coalition. Hi, my name is Natasha Minsker. I am an attorney and advocate based in Sacramento, California.
My name is Kat Brooks. I'm the co-founder of the Anti-Police Terror Project and executive director of the Justice Teams Network. It was sort of kismet, actually. I had gone to Mark Philpart at PolicyLink with an idea about the next bill that we wanted to push through at the state level in regards to policing. And he was like, I was just in conversation with Senator Kamlager, and I didn't know her. And she had the exact same idea.
She's really been a true champion for criminal justice reform. And by a champion, I really mean that she's been our political muscle behind the many reforms that we've pushed each time she had an opportunity to speak in front of the legislature on these various policy proposals. She was able really to speak from her own personal experience. People who she knew fell victim to the inherent bias in our criminal justice system.
She has really achieved incredible accomplishments in her short time in the legislature, including limiting probation terms and passing AB 333, the reform of the gang enhancement and the gang allegation law, was just incredible, a huge victory.
The one word that I would use to describe Senator Kamlager is authentic.
Fierce.
Tenacious.
She is always herself, no matter the circumstance.
There's something about elected officials who are able to maintain their unapologetic commitment to their values, right? What actually drove them to want to serve people in this way in the first place. And she is unapologetic about her love for justice, her love for Black folks, the vision she sees.
She is resilient, intelligent, and she has swagger, let me tell you.
She is always speaking truth to power. What's great is that she is now a person in power who can actually change the rules of the game and shift dynamics and really achieve true change and make a difference.
Senator Kamlager embodies justice done differently because she has lived experience. It's because of that lived experience that she understands some fundamental false narratives. People believe that the criminal legal system is a system that brings safety and justice. It does not. She brings those truths to light in a way that is powerful, that makes legislative sense, and that advances an agenda that is powerful and transformative.
She called me one night, like out of the blue, and then she was like, I'm gonna send you something. And I was like, all right. And then forgot about it. And then a few weeks later, her staffer hit me up and was like, what's your address? The center wants to send you something. And I was like, all right. Anyway, what she sent me was that amazing coffee mug with the saying, F it, I'll do it, the Black woman. And I drink coffee out of that thing every single day.
Hopefully you can hear me now. I must have been the one with the issues. You got me. I got a thumbs up. Well, welcome to both of you, both Amelia Land and Senator Sidney Kamlager. Sorry for the confusion on my end. Great to see you both. Welcome to the stage. Thank you for joining us and allowing us to recognize you and your work in this way. I'm going to invite Professor Armour to join us in the conversation as well. Welcome back. Before we jump into it, I do want to invite the audience to come up with questions for our panelists and drop them into the comments section. And I have a few of my own. We're going to start, and then as we get into it a little bit, we'll take a few questions from the audience before we wrap tonight. So, thank you all for joining this conversation. Really, I want to start with you. We heard a little bit about it, I think in Samuel's comments, but maybe in the video that we shared before the event. But you're helping to coordinate a statewide and national effort to abolish slavery, which many people assume that already happened either with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 or with the 13th Amendment in 1865. So how does the prison system, economically exploit people, their families and communities, and what can we do about it?
Well, first I want to say hi, Keith. Hello, Professor Armour. Hello, Senator Kamlager. It's just amazing to be able to sit here in this space with you all right now. As you know, I'm high on anxiety right now. We're waiting for that phone call,
That's right.
and we don't know when it's coming. And so I'm literally just sitting here like on pins and needles. I was telling my friend earlier today. I said it's kind of like waiting for a baby. You got the bag packed, you got the car seat, you got the extra blankets, and now you're just waiting for the water to break so you can haul tail halfway across the street, right?
So
But
in case people don't know, Samuel was granted parole recently, and we're in this review period to wait for the parole board to finalize his decision and the governor to decide whether he wants to act to block his release.
yes. So we're excited.
Congratulations to you and to him.
Thank you. I'm anxiously awaiting. But on to some of the work. So at first I have to acknowledge my amazing shero on here, Senator Kamlager. She is one of the most phenomenal human beings I've ever encountered, and without her we would not be here. We have embarked on a Herculean effort. In addition to being chair for the California Abolition Act and the coalition, I am also a member of the steering committee for Abolish Slavery National Network. We are a national coalition that is currently comprised of over 32 states, all seeking to remove this language from our respective states' constitutions. In addition to that, we are also working with Senator Jeff Merkley and Representative Nikema Williams on a federal resolution, or amendment to the United States Constitution to deal with the 13th Amendment's loophole. So when you ask the question about economic exploitation at the hands of the prison industrial complex, I'm gonna kind of narrowly focus it here specifically to California, because this is one of the largest carceral states in the union. We out incarcerate China. But in addition to that, a lot of times when we talk about the exploitation of resources, people don't really know what we're looking at. So on one hand, I'm going to give you an example. As you know, phone calls are a headache. Then we have the packages, which oftentimes are what I call vending machine food. Nothing really of any substance, marked up extremely high. Then you have one of the nastiest, which is the 55%. So for example, in order for my husband and my son, who is also my son Elijah, is currently incarcerated. He is serving 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole for a crime that he did not commit. That's another story. However, in order for them to be able to go to the quote unquote store or commissary for a month, they can spend a max of $225. In order for them to be able to have that, I have to put about $580 on their books, because CDCR takes 50% of that for restitution, and then there is a 5% administration fee. Then you talk about visitation. My husband's in Lancaster. I'm in Sacramento. Me and the girls just went down to see him. It was a $2,500 trip. When we're talking about airfare, hotel, rental car, it was $160 the first day. Visitation, and that was food out of the vending machine. It was $200 for the second day for visitation, just to be able to eat. And so economically, what it's costing the families is unfathomable. But then we're going to take it a step further. Here in California, a lot of times when we are talking about inmate labor, wages, slavery, we oftentimes hear about the private corporations that are basically extorting our communities, right? But what we don't talk about are entities such as CalPIA. In the state of California, we have a very unique entity called CalPIA, California Prison Industry Authority. CalPIA has a board. CalPIA's board is structured like a corporation. Take a wild guess who the chair of CalPIA's board is. You probably know this. It's the Secretary of CDCR, who is currently Kathleen Allison. Now, What's really interesting about this is that not only is CalPIA's board structured like a corporation, its members are appointed by various members within our state's legislature. The chair of CalPIA's board is appointed directly by the governor of the state of California. There are other members that also sit on the board, and they are appointed by various members, whether they're senators or assembly members of the legislature. So we are talking about a system here that the state of California is actually profiting and extorting the members of its own community. And then you take it a step further, CalPIA also only allows contracts with other government entities. So for example, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Transportation. So technically our loved ones are inside of these quote unquote rehabilitation centers. And they are working for a government entity, the state of California's Department of Corrections and Alleged Rehabilitation. However, when they get out, they can't get a government job because they are quote unquote felons. And so, you know, when you start talking about the money that's involved, that's where we really start to get at the heart of these things, right? Because we know that the state of California, CDCR recently announced that they have a surplus. Well, I'm curious as to exactly where does that surplus come from? When you look at the quality of healthcare, when you look at the quality of food, when you look at some of the programming options, it's not that there's a surplus, it's that they are intentionally not spending my tax-paying dollars to house my husband and my son and provide them with adequate healthcare, adequate food, and educational opportunities to help them return to be better citizens. And so it's a rabbit hole. It's a rabbit hole that we could go down. But, you know, when you really start talking about the prison industry, you know, we have to look at the medical costs. We have to look at the food costs. We have to look at the constructions of the buildings. There is so much money in the carceral system. People oftentimes don't realize how deep it goes. Who's actually building these prisons? Who's providing the infrastructure? Who's providing, you know, the lighting, the you know, all of the things that go into building and sustaining a prison. And so last year, when COVID really started to ravish through the prison system, Samuel and I had a conversation, and he was essentially forced to go to work. And we knew that he was going to be coming up for parole this past August, and that had he decided that he didn't want to go to work, he was going to be hit with a 115, which we are calling the modern day whip lash on the back. It's a rules violation, which essentially, had he said, no, I don't want to work, they would have hit him with the rules violation, and he would have automatically been denied. The denial start off at 15 years, and they walk them down according to whatever mitigating circumstances. So from 15, 10, 7, 5 to 3 years would have been the minimum. And this has nothing to do with the wages, which, by the way, I would like to show you all here. This is Samuel's timesheet, okay? He makes 75 cents an hour. He worked 160 and a half hours for a total of $120. They took 55% restitution, which was $66. So he took home $54 for 160 hours of work, combating COVID, blood spills, cleaning fecal matter from walls, windows, etc. This is what we are doing to some of the most vulnerable population ever. And then we expect that after we've dehumanized people and then we've criminalized them, we throw them in these cages, we treat them in inhumane fashions, we expect for them to rehabilitate themselves under these conditions, and be returned to this quote unquote civilized society that somehow barbarically treats people in this fashion, yet we want to call ourselves civilized. And so when we talk about the overall cost, it's not just the financial cost, it's the emotional, the spiritual, and the psychological cost and toll that it takes on all of us as well. And then my last comment to kind of touch on something that the professor touched on, is about how we are pipelining people. So my son Elijah is a foster child that I adopted. Elijah was abandoned at the age of 10 by his birth mother. He was left alone in the streets until he was 16. California's foster care system didn't pick him up until he was almost 17. I got him at 17 and a half. Elijah has never been in trouble with the law a day in his life, yet he is sitting in prison right now, serving 3 consecutive life sentences. And he was convicted under the old felony murder law. But here we are talking about a kid who was abandoned, who had a parent who had substance abuse issues. We have a society that just absolutely let him fall through the cracks. But what happens is when you have a child like that and he goes into 7-Eleven because the foster care family is being paid $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 a month, but they're not providing food or adequate shelter for him. And then he goes into 7-Eleven, he steals a bag of potato chips and he steals a 7-Up because he's hungry. He's going to get arrested. He's going to get a record. And now it's going to quickly spiral completely out of control until now this kid is in the prison system because his life, along with so many other Black and brown men in this country and women, their lives have no value unless it's directly tied to an economic engine that they're not benefiting from. And that is what the prison industrial complex is doing and has done.
Wow. Thank you. So much in that. Jamelia, thank you for sharing that, and being who you have been for Elijah. And I know you're not going to give up, but man, it's what you just shared is so deep and powerful. And I do want to pick up with you, Senator Kamalaga, on this question about economic justice, racial justice, criminal justice reform. You've talked about all these things together. Can you talk about how you see these pieces fitting together and why economic empowerment is so vital to this work of reimagining our justice system?
Sure. First, I want to just say thank you for the honor and for inviting me here. You know, I am humbled to be recognized along with my sister Jamelia and also Lily. I think it says something that you honored 3 women who are doing the do. So just want to say thank you to UnCommon Law and thank you, Keith. Yes, economic justice. You know, I actually believe that economic parity, economic justice, discussions around economics are at the heart of all of the systems that we talk about. It is oftentimes the nexus of failed systems or the nexus of systems operating successfully at maximum capacity. And I say that because I actually do believe our criminal legal system, our probation system, our parole system those systems are operating as they were designed. And it is up to us to kind of talk about the intentionality behind the design of these systems, who they were meant for, and why they do need to be dismantled. Both Jamelia and Professor Armour, hit so many nails on the head. It is as much about race and classism as it is about economics, as it is about education, as it is about affordability and employment in the communities in which we reside. And if you take away all of the good options, if you remove all of the good viable choices that are available to us, then what's left are poor choices, bad decisions, and really bad circumstances for which folks have to select from. And I just think at the bottom of all of that, or at the center of all of that, is economics. Folks wouldn't be left to make poor choices if they had economic alternatives that made sense for them and their families. 2 years ago, when I was in the assembly, I chaired the Select Committee on Incarcerated Women. We had our first hearing and we talked to a number of women who shared their stories about how they ended up incarcerated. And to the number, you heard women talk about being at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong partner. You had women talk about poverty, essentially, and because of poverty, the kinds of choices that they were forced to make, which ultimately resulted in some bad decisions and falling into circumstances where the thing that was in front of them was ultimately going to land them, into the court system. And then once you are sort of attacked by the court system, let me tell you something, they're not going to let you go, because that is an economic ecosystem that includes the probation departments, it includes the courts, it includes prosecutors, it includes public defenders, it includes bailiffs, it includes judges. Everybody that I mentioned has a job because those systems work. Okay? If you're not arresting folks, if you're not charging folks, if you're not giving them inordinate sentences, if you're not repeatedly violating them, if you're not sending them back before the judge, none of those folks get a check. And so we have a responsibility to talk about that and say, are we interested in earning revenue on the backs of mostly poor folks? Because it's the poor folks that aren't able to afford the defense that they need to catapult them out of the system and then help them stay out of the system. Right? The more cases you have, the more repeat offenders you have, the more money, the more churn the government makes. And so I think ACA 3 is asking us to, take this blasphemous, racist article out of the Constitution for this state, and to force us to reimagine how we envision labor, dignity, and value of a human being, regardless of if they are incarcerated or not. Now, I have to tell you, Keith, last legislative session, we also debated a bill that would force employers to pay dignified wages to folks with disabilities who are on the spectrum. Because according to state law, if you are developmentally challenged, I can also pay you pennies on the dollar for your work. So on the one hand, you have folks who are not incarcerated but are on the spectrum earning pennies on the dollar. And on the other hand, you have folks who are incarcerated earning pennies on the dollar, being forced to work. And so somehow we as a state have to have real discussions about how we value folks across the spectrum and what we think, or what qualifies as a dignified wage. And that's what ACA 3 is all about, because folks are answering phones and helping you with customer service. They are building furniture for you. They are making license plates. They are doing all sorts of things for free, because the state of California has created this economic engine that allows all of us to benefit from this free labor. And if we would jump up and down and talk about, human rights violations that are happening in China, if we would jump up and down and talk about human rights violations that are happening in North Korea, then we should at least have the Constitution to talk about the things that are happening in our own state.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you. I want to give Professor Armour a chance to weigh in on this issue of economic justice as well, if you have thoughts about that. And then I'm going to and then shift gears a little bit and ask you, Professor Armour, to talk about this intersection of language and ideas, and how changing the way we think about language and art in particular might ultimately help us rethink many of our assumptions about blame and punishment. So why is this reframing so so critical to the work of dismantling mass incarceration. So you can share about any of those things you want to talk about, Professor.
Right on. Yeah, I love all the remarks that were just shared by my two predecessors. Man, I'm just sitting here soaking it up now. It keeps coming back for me, Senator Kamlager, to us not humanizing these people once we have incarcerated them. We think of people who are incarcerated as just so much toxic human waste to be dumped somewhere and warehoused and forgotten. Like I said, when they told me they pulled up the trees and paved over the grass so you can be as punitive as possible, because these aren't people, these are monsters. We otherize them. They're super predators. That's deeply woven in us. It's hard to combat that, and we got a long way to go. The window is shifted, but man, it's a constant fight, because it can shift back so easily. They can find some outlier, some Willie Horton outlier, and that can become the narrative all of a sudden, all over again. They're already doing it. They're trying to do it with people breaking into Gucci and, Vuitton and grabbing stuff and running or whatever, what they've done with critical race theory, et cetera. So it's going to be a real struggle to humanize the people. There's so many of us in the Black community ourselves otherized, monsterized, demonized, what I call niggerized, right? When Chris Rock, uses that word. Now back to the second part of your question, Keith, what the power of language and linguistic and non-linguistic forms of symbolic communication, and why we struggle over them, why we struggle over a word like the N-word, for example, it took me a long time to find a publisher who was going to finally put it out there without me being in any way apologetic or compromising, because there are some things that it gets at that no other word gets at. It's unparaphrasable, it's transgressive, it's unsayable, and yet we have also been able to find in that same venomous word reservoirs of solidarity. When, Pop says, how many brothers fell victim to the street? Rest in peace, young nigga, there's a heaven for a G. I'd be a lie if I told you that I never thought of death. My niggas, we the last one left, right? My niggas can't be any more loving and any more about solidarity than the way he's using, the way you've heard many others use it when they talk about, I love my niggas more than anything else, right? It can be a term of profound solidarity that Black folk alone can use, by the way. Let me just say, the Black folk alone are in a position to use, because we have been the historical targets of the epithet, and so are the only people in a position to use it with irony. Right? Just basically understand the basics of irony, understand the basics of being the target of a historical epithet, and therefore being in a position to use it with that sense of irony, with that kind of sense of ironic self-reference. And people who are not part of that historically targeted group can't. So I just want to get that out real quick, because sometimes people get confused, and, but we're just having established, kind of that. Yes, language like that, when I heard my mom referred to, before I even knew, when I was 3 or 4 years old, before I knew what a nigger was, I heard my mom referred to as a nigger lover, because she was a white woman with a mixed child. So that was all the evidence they needed to see, and they were talking about the 50s and 60s. It was an illegal thing in a number of states, right? So I've seen the word used to demonize and trivialize and dehumanize, but I've also seen us be able to roll with it judo-wise and use a lot of its historical venom as ways of saying, we understand we all we got. At the end of the day, we all we got. And we see that over and over.
Thank you. Thank you for those comments. I want to come back before we go to some of the audience questions, I want to come back to you, Jamelia. And I just watching you work and the impact you have on the community inside and outside of prison. I see that you have done what countless women, particularly Black and brown women, have been doing for so long. I mean, I think the videos that we shared about both what Samuel was observing and the video that we used to promote the event that told some more of your story, it gave us a glimpse of how you fight, what you fight for. And I'm happy to have you share more about that if you want. But I'm wondering whether you can share a bit about what sustains you in this work. You do so much for your family, for your community. What allows you to take a break, take care of yourself, recharge, and get back into it? Can you share some of that?
So that's a great question. I've been wrestling with this whole self-care thing. So I ain't gonna lie to you. I don't know what the hell that looks like. I shower. I sleep. I drink coffee. I pray. My grandmother used to say that you'll rest when you're dead. So I'm not going to get a whole lot of it because I got a lot of fight. But the truth of the matter is, I don't really know. I mean, self-care for me is what I do. Self-care is fighting. Because there isn't a moment that I get a break. I was just having a conversation the other day about just being Black, right? And being Black in this corporation that we like to call a country. And I say that because we are very much so a corporate capitalist society, and we like to pretend that we're a democracy, but that's another conversation. But for me, it's like there's never a break. At any given moment, I recognize that as a Black woman, my life is not safe. I could be sitting on my couch and bullets can come in, whether it's the police or somebody in the community. I could be in my car and I have a 50% chance of surviving a routine traffic stop, or somebody could pull up on me and open fire on me. My sons, my grandson, my husband, every Black man that I know, I'm fearful for their life because there's a 50% chance that law enforcement can kill them. There's a 50% chance someone in the community, let me break that down, 33% chance that law enforcement can kill them, 33% chance that somebody in their community can kill them, and 33% chance that a white supremacist can kill them. So I'm constantly in fear. I never know what's going to happen. My son is actually cellmates with my nephew, who's doing 38 years. Wow. I'm constantly, worrying about the next phone call. I deal with death a lot, whether it's police involved violence or it's community violence. Just this month alone, we hit a 1-year mark. There were two killings by SAC PD 10 days apart. And then, the day after Thanksgiving, my daughter's 2 friends were murdered at the mall, 17 and 19-year-old brothers. And so I literally never get a break. I don't know what self-care is other than to continue to care for my people, because there's no way that I can rest. There's no way that I can really have any peace of mind when I know that every single day we are out here and we are fighting. None of us rest. And so, I love the concept of self-care and healing circles and all of these wonderful things that we talk about, right? But the reality of it is, until we start to engage one another, number one, as fellow human beings, and we stop othering one another, you're Black, you're white, you're short, you're fat, you're tall, you're this, you're that, and really start treating each other from a humanistic level. But most importantly, until we start treating each other through a trauma-informed lens, we're never going to get anywhere. Because every last one of us as human beings, we love somebody, We cry, we laugh, we hurt, we run the gamut of emotions, right? But at the end of the day, we're all hurting. And if COVID hasn't come to show anything else, it has come to show that no matter who you are, no matter where you are, things can touch you. Things can impact your life, whether it's a virus that we can't see, whether it's economics, whether it's education. And so we have to start to look at each other through a more holistic lens. And so for me, what I do to take care of myself as best as I can is I'm constantly educating myself, and I'm constantly sharing that information with other people to empower them. Because I'm hopeful that one day I will be able to sit down, I will be able to take a nap, and I won't be dead, as Grandma so kindly wanted to remind me. But I'm realistic about it. Self-care, I take a shower, I eat. That's it.
Thank you for such a brutally necessary, honest response. Many of us are looking for an answer to that question. I was hoping you had it. I think too many of us in the same boat, but I think we also have the opportunity with the community of people who are just gathered here at this event. There are healers among us for sure, and we all need it. You as they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. So you need to, like we all do, we need to find a way to really take care of ourselves and not think it's like selfish to do that. It's necessary to do it. We can't go on if we don't do it. I wish I had the answers. Really, I'm looking to you folks for some guidance there. Hey, if people have ideas, resources, drop it in the comments section. We will make it available to folks at the event tonight, because I think we're all struggling with this question. And I mean, the experiences you've had, your family, your community, our communities have had, and you talked about trauma, obviously, and in our work, we often, we say we provide trauma-informed counseling and legal assistance, because we know that up to 90% of the people that we work with who are serving life sentences are survivors of one type of violence or harm or another. And most were survivors long before they ever harmed anyone and landed in prison. And we need to be aware of that. We need to be responsible for that and responsive to that. And so I put one question to you, Senator Kamlager, about this issue about trauma and trauma-informed services, about trauma-informed programming inside the prisons. Is there a path forward in the legislature to make something like that a reality?
Yes, that's the short answer. I want to circle back and just say that it was really sobering to hear Jamelia share her answer to that question. And I want to echo your statement, Keith, about it's really incumbent upon all of us as a community of sentient beings, of Black people, of brown people, Indigenous people, to put judgment aside and to embrace each other, which includes ourselves, because this life is incredibly brutal. And if we are not finding ways to practice self-care, to figure out how we love ourselves, the road is just too difficult. And sometimes that means we have to separate judgment from how people do that. But Jamelia is doing God's work every single day. And so to hear this sister say that she's also looking for examples of self-care that she can practice, I think that's a clarion call for all of us who know her and love her to make sure that we are helping her with other solutions to that question, because we need you, Jamelia. We need you and we love you. And you're an example for so many other young women to follow. And we want them to be as resilient as you are. Trauma-informed care, trauma-informed policy. You know, Keith, honestly, I have some conflict with that phraseology, because on the one hand, I do think we need to continue to work to have reflexive, flexible, permeable, complicated policy that allow people that we trust who are elected into office to use that flexibility in that policy for good. And oftentimes we create policy that really fits, it's the lowest common denominator. And we create something with the broadest of brush strokes. And so every person with like all of these nuanced and sort of, you know, anomalies get caught up in this system. And it's because we had to create policy that became a one size fits all. And that's not how life is lived. You know, I talked about my bill, AB 124, which would allow folks who, you know, were involved in some criminal activity because of circumstances related to being human, being a victim of human trafficking, about being sexually assaulted, you know, and so as a result of that circumstance, they participated in some sort of criminal activity and then were incarcerated for long periods of time. And the bill said that you could go back to the judge for resentencing and allow them to look at the circumstances that led to your behavior. You know, that's, in my mind, trauma-informed policy, where you say, hey, now let's take a pause and actually look at what led you to make that decision. And then how do we sort of afford appropriate rehabilitation, you know, or punishment or reconciliation? How do we sort of integrate restorative justice into these penal codes that we keep wanting to make more and more of? You know, that's responsive and it's also reflective. It's the same reason behind me doing my 333 bill on gang enhancements, because we know that we have these very broad stroked definitions around, you know, what can be considered a gang allegation. And as a result, you're Black, you got a tattoo, you got these certain colors on, you're from this neighborhood, you knew this particular person. Okay, now I can charge you as being a gang member, you know? And because we have done that, we have taken the specificity of circumstance out of the equation. And I certainly believe that when you are talking about incarcerating someone and when you are figuring out ways to eliminate their due process, there need to be as many firewalls protecting you and your rights as possible. On the other hand, when we talk about trauma-informed, I get nervous about us sort of creating a framework where all Black folks or brown folks or indigenous folks get painted as traumatized victims. You know, the Black people that I know are resilient, are strong, find ways to celebrate in the midst of all kind of tragedy. Black folks are the folks that everybody else wants to be, without the things that we have to suffer because of our race and our strength. And so I reject always having to affiliate my race and my color with trauma, because I see it as resilience. And so I'm trying to find that nuance in the middle that threads the reality of what it means to be Black in a country that that saw us as property, that refused to accept us as human, and that has figured out a way through capitalistic systems and frameworks to continue that narrative, and to celebrate the strength and the power and the legacy of what it means to be Black. I mean, let's be clear, you know, we have come from kings and queens, and nobody will ever be able to take that away. So I get in my head sometimes when I'm thinking about that, but I want us to be really honest when we're talking about trauma, because the last thing, and this will be the last thing I say, we're also pretty subjective about who we decide has been impacted by a traumatic experience. So I will give you an example. When I was working on AB 124, we were talking about folks who, were involved in criminal behavior because of sexual abuse circumstances. And we used Kiana Aldridge, who was a sister who'd been incarcerated for a very long time. She had been sold for sex. She had been prostituted multiple times. And eventually she got fed up and she said, I'm gonna take matters into my own hands. And she put the man in the trunk and a whole bunch of other stuff happened. It is okay to talk about that sister surviving sexual abuse. We very rarely talk about the men in our worlds who have suffered sexual abuse and who have involved themselves in behavior that we categorize as being criminal because of it. Because we don't want to be honest about the fact that our young men are being raped and sodomized in our jails and in our prisons. We don't want to talk about the fact that many of our young men have been raped and abused as young children in families by family members and friends. And so we are very subjective and selective about who has been traumatized. And when you are not honest about that, that is also the creation of a pipeline into the carceral system. And so I want us to be honest when we're talking about trauma so that we can be honest when we're talking about the restorative and rehabilitative nature of our justice. And I don't know if folks are there yet. That's why it is very hard to talk about the sex offender registry. That is why it is very hard to talk about felonies that are not violent crimes, that are not the nons. I get really tired of talking about folks who stole bubblegum from the store, because we don't want to talk about folks that have been involved in some sort of sexual crime because we're not ready to talk about the trauma that maybe they experienced as a young person or a younger person that might have led to what they actually did. So people, are we ready to get honest about all of that?
So if I could jump in here one second, because you got me over here like, don't get her talking too much. I'm ready to go get my t-shirt and tennis shoes, and it turns into a all-out rally. But something that you touched on, and I kind of want to bring my husband into this space. So Samuel developed a theory. It's called the theory of emotional illiteracy-based criminality. And this theory connects people experiencing adverse childhood experiences and them choosing criminal behavior as coping mechanisms based on those adverse childhood experiences. And so when we talk about trauma, right, you made some very, very good points. But when we talk about trauma, I think one of the most difficult things to do, especially in this country, AKA corporation, because this country is very unique in the creation of racism. My opinion is that racism in this country is in fact a psychologically indoctrinated mental health disease, right? Not only does it impact the people that it is intended to offend and harm, but as we see with the insurrection on January 6th, it also, and all the Trumpers around the country, it also impacts those that take it and use it as a tool. Right. But in this country, we use racism and we use it as a way to other one another. So we can't continue to see each other as one human race or human species and treat everyone through that lens, because the reality of it is this country, every last one of us are traumatized. This country's roots run deep with blood, with violence, with hatred, with, listen to some of the things that were said. Take a few good drops of white blood and put them into a Black woman and breed and all of these things, right? We're talking about rape. We're talking about, violence. We are talking about a country that is rooted in all of these vile evils. However, it just looks different as to who do we apply these things to based on the box that they can check off in their ethnicity, right? So we are looked at as being savages when we are responding psychologically or physically to environments that are not conducive for the well-being of a human being, period. However, when we see people who are quote unquote supposed to be the civilizers, who are actually the savages, engaging in this type of behavior, they get called patriots, right? They get called, the good old boys because of systemic racism. And so I think that racism within itself is a part of the problem as to why we can't see each other as equals and why we cannot truly be trauma informed as to us as a human species and how much trauma we have just all taken in irregardless.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all that. You know, what you referred to as this theory about emotional illiteracy. I mean, it's the practice that we see play out, that I've seen play out hundreds of times in the parole board rooms. It's never been needed to be a theory. I just see it, just look at it and describe what's happening over and over and over again. So I do want to shift enough to I think we got some questions coming in from the audience, and I want to give them a chance to have them be addressed. There's a familiar face, Sam Johnson. How do we address trauma for the incarcerated when the board re-traumatizes them with the very word that is exposed to a psychologist addressing their pain and hurt? Who wants to take this one?
So I'm gonna jump in here real quick, and I'm gonna say that's an amazing question. But I don't know if we can adequately answer it without looking at who the board commissioners are and how the board is comprised, right? So that's a part of the problem right there. You have people who are insensitive and usually are career law enforcement individuals. And so they have this mentality and this mindset. They're not there to find you quote unquote worthy or approve you to be found suitable to go home. They're actually there to poke at all of the potential holes to keep you locked in there. So a part of my personal opinion is a part of the process is to in fact re-traumatize you again.
Thank you. I've definitely seen that way too many times.
I want to echo what Jamelia said. Most of it is the makeup of the board, and the majority of the folks that are on those boards come from law enforcement. And so they just are not trained to consider restorative justice or really to see folks as they truly are. The other issue is that remorse is intangible and incredibly subjective. And at the hearings, essentially, that's what folks are wanting to see from you. Are you remorseful for what you've done? Have you changed? Are you a different person? And how do you identify remorse? I mean, how I receive that may be incredibly different from how Professor Armour receives it, may be incredibly different from how Jamelia receives it. You know, does remorse mean that I'm crying? Does it mean that I'm kind of looking at you stoically? You'd have no idea what's going on inside of my brain or my heart just by looking at me. And yet these members are asking the folks that come before them to do this kind of dance and prove to them in ways that only they know how they're receiving that information. The third thing is we don't educate or train folks to prepare for the parole board hearings. So you go to high school, you go to college, you go to school. Each day is about training you and educating you and preparing you to take your test so that you can get the hell up out that class. You are incarcerated, but we don't do that. We don't say, okay, now let's educate you, prepare you, let's train, let's give you this rewarding information so that when you go before this hearing, you are adequately and appropriately prepared to succeed. Isn't the goal success to get out? Isn't that the goal? So if we're not affording the folks on the hearing, on the board, or the folks who go before them with this, I have to question the authenticity of the process and what the true intent is. And so we have to really, you have to own that. And I think the governor has tried to I mean, I've had discussions with the administration about like, how do we change this? You know, and one way is to just blow up the whole damn box and start from scratch and get real about the intention. And if you're not going to do that, then everything else, it will be incremental. But I think it's incredibly important that we continue to shine a light on how this really has eroded people's chances to get out. There have been some amazingly provocative stories. I think there was an article a few years ago in the New York Times about our parole board hearing process. And in fact, I used that when I challenged the folks that were on the parole board about exactly what they did and what their goal was. You know, because in my mind, it seems like the outcome is to keep folks in. And that's exactly 100% not what I am interested in doing. And so I hope that we're able to continue to pressure folks at all levels about how we redo this.
Thank you so much. We have a system that that is, I mean, it's so subjective, and subjectivity always disadvantages Black and brown folks when it comes to our criminal legal process. We see that in the parole board, where because of our sentencing policies over the decades, Black folks are much more likely to have to go to a parole board in order to be released. And they're the least likely to be granted parole when they actually go. And it's something, it's a truth that we have to deal with. We also have parole commissioners bringing their subjective perception of whether someone has insight into their crime or sufficient remorse. And those are racially biased as well. Less likely to see remorse on a Black man than they are someone who may look like them or come from a similar background. But then there's a deeper dysfunction in this process, which is that we're asking people to open up about, and this gets to Sam Johnson's question, to open up about their most disturbing, painful memories and experiences, without the tools to really connect the dots between those experiences and choices they later made, and more importantly, when it's not safe to do it, because you're asking them to revisit those most painful experiences, to relive them, to be re-traumatized, but we're not going to take care of them. We're not going to give you a safe place to do that, to share it. We're not going to help put you back together when you take yourself apart to do this work. And we have parole commissioners who aren't equipped or even inclined to really understand.
Well, Keith, the other issue is there may be some instances where you don't feel remorse and maybe you shouldn't. So if you committed a crime because, say, someone like, you know, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to use examples, but, you know, you say, hey, I was incarcerated, I did my time, and I'm ready to get out. I don't feel remorse about what happened because I feel like what I did, I had to do. And so, you know, but do the parole board commissioners, do they want to hear that or not? And, you know, that's an uncomfortable truth. You know, not everyone has to. You don't have to always feel sorry for something you did. Sometimes you was in your right mind when you did it, and you went and said, I'm going to deal with the circumstances of that.
The other uncomfortable truth in this is that things like insight into a crime you committed when you were 15 or 16, and even remorse about it, neither of those things predicts violence risk.
True.
Neither of them. We pretend that they do, but they just don't as a reality. I got to get off my soapbox and actually look for some other there's some other questions that have come in. We're going to take at least one or two more if we can get through. This is a long one. What are your thoughts regarding the role that CDCR mental health clinicians contribute to the harm toward those incarcerated? Why is the mental health profession so silent regarding harmful practices in CDCR, such as solitary confinement, ADSEG, deficient mental health services, and the pipelines to incarceration? Great question. Who wants to take that on?
Because they're all crooks. Okay, that's probably not the best answer. But I'm gonna say is number one, to talk about mental health, period. There's a stigma associated with it, right? But then when you start talking about mental health within the carceral setting, it's almost unheard of. because most of these systems have absolutely no care or concern about people's mental health and their mental well-being. Because if they did, we wouldn't have so many people incarcerated. We would actually be tending to people. We have people who are incarcerated who are suffering from severe mental health disorders, and it's only being exacerbated by being placed in a carceral setting. And like most things that people don't understand, they don't like. And so there's a serious lack of understanding as to what is happening to us as a society, period, with our overall mental health and well-being. But then again, like I said, if you take that and you look at that through a carceral state lens, there's just no care and concern. And then I'm gonna take it one step further and say that the majority of the people who are working inside of these carceral settings, they're not equipped. They're not equipped to deal with, mental health issues. They're barely equipped to deal with some of the physical things that happen in there. And then there is also the element that a lot, not all, but a lot of people who are working inside these settings, they are suffering from mental health issues themselves. One, from just being in the setting, and two, they are a part of the problem. We see a lot of criminal behavior and activities occurring at the hands of those who are supposed to be watching over our loved ones. And so they don't care about you sitting in a cage for hours on end, or days or months or years on end, and what that may be doing to you psychologically, because they're not there for rehabilitative purposes. This is a punitive system. This is about punish until we break your soul. So when it comes to mental health in the carceral setting, it's worse than it is in the free world, but mental health nonetheless is still something that we don't talk about and we don't address the way that we should.
Thank you. Any last words on this or any of the other questions before we close this discussion?
Please donate to UnCommon Law. This is also a fundraiser. Help them make their mark.
That's right. Help them keep helping all the amazing people. And thank you again, Keith, for all that you've done. We need more people like you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you all for being with us. We were going to have a presentation performance by Tongo Ison Martin. I think we had some difficulties and he wasn't able to be with us tonight. So we had a little more time with this conversation, and it's good we did, because I got all riled up, which means I'll be fired up to go to work tomorrow and all that. I want to thank all of you for taking your time to be with us tonight, to join this discussion. Some of what we've been talking about really has me thinking about the people who are stuck in this process, in this system, that depend on parole commissioners to feel that they can that they'll be comfortable releasing them from prison. People who have to go through this process and convince a parole board they can come home. Kamala, I think you mentioned that they often don't have much help understanding the process, navigating the process. I was meeting the other day, earlier this week, and he said something that really struck me, and I think for some reason the reason it struck me this time was because it was becoming familiar to me. Like I'd heard it from several other people that we've been working with, especially people who had appeared before the parole board and been denied parole before they started working with us at UnCommon Law. What he said was that for the first time after his decades of incarceration, his trial and appeals and all that, and even prior parole hearings, that he finally felt that he wasn't alone in that room. He felt that he had a dedicated advocate who was there to help him tell his story and who could speak on his behalf in ways the parole board could understand.
Right.
You know, this is a client who was recently granted parole and will hopefully be coming home in a couple of months. But that's who we are for folks inside. And, you know, I'm proud to do this work. I'm proud of the team that we've built to do this work. And in order for us to keep doing it, you know, as Senator Kamlager said, we need help. Because we want to help folks come home through this process. And we want to replace this process with one that's actually fair, one that actually isn't so subjective and subject to the same biases that the rest of the criminal legal system is. So I did tell all of our audience tonight that I was going to ask 3 times, give you 3 opportunities to support our effort. And I see we are making our way. I'm looking at not just the amount raised here. We're at 105,000. Thank you so much for that. But I'm also looking at the number of donations. You know, we started tonight with 2 in that category. I explained what those were, but we started with 2. We're up to 31. Let's have our goal be to get to 40, 45, 50 before we're done tonight. So we got a few more minutes to get there. And I do want to just take another moment to thank our guests this evening. You know, Professor Armour, your words were very, I think, exciting, inspiring, provocative, important, in helping us change the narrative about who we're talking about, what we're talking about, and why, and what's possible with this system when we start to reimagine what it should be. I like what Senator Kamlager, you said, blow this thing up and start from scratch. Count me in. Count me in. Thank you all so much for who you've been in our community in this conversation tonight. I don't want to keep us too late, and I'm looking to see if sometimes Annie has extra directions for me. I don't think she does tonight. I hesitate to take another question. I think maybe we should end tonight, but I mentioned the different ways that you can support the work. I mentioned that you could scan the QR code. I mentioned that you could also go to the website and donate there. And I think we'll drop another link in the comments section. I see some of these comments coming through from clients we've worked with. This is powerful stuff, you know, coming home from a life without the possibility of parole sentence after 30 years. I look forward to us doing this in person next year. UnCommon Heroes has become a real reunion for us, for our team, and for the folks we work with inside and their families. We look forward next year. We're going to keep the campaign going for another couple of days. So if you want to drop those checks in the mail, please do. You want to go to the website and donate, please do. Again, thanks to our panelists, our UnCommon Heroes. Congratulations to Lily. Thank you, Damien, for showing up and showing us how it's done. Thanks for everybody who joined us tonight.
Can I steal 2 seconds real quick? I want to give a shout out to all the women that are incarcerated throughout this country, because a lot of times when we're having conversations about incarceration and support, it's usually heavily around the men. But I want to make sure that I send a shout out to every last one of my women that are fighting incarceration throughout this country. You are not forgotten. We love you. And I ask that the men who are out there start showing up for the women. Start putting some money on our books. Start bringing our children to see us. Start filling those visiting rooms for us like we fill them for you. Stand in the gap for us like we stand in the gap for you. And with that, I love you all. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful words.
So, Keith, I also want to say 2 things. I want to give a shout out to all the family members who hold it down silently. And sometimes maybe with some shame. And they are the ones who are working 2 and 3 jobs to make sure that they're putting money on the books for the folks that they love who are inside. And when we talk about poverty, we're talking about not only the folks who are incarcerated, but we're talking about the network and the village that is outside, that is struggling in so many ways to make sure that they're keeping the lights on and keeping the spirits up for the folks that are on the inside. So I just want to give a shout out to all of those family members and loved ones. I was one of them who had to figure out how to do all things because it is incredibly hard. And I also just want to ask everyone once again to give some money to UnCommon Law, because these folks are translators and they are navigators for justice. And if you get your phone and you want a new app to help you navigate through something, or when you're looking to upgrade your little navigation star in your car, this is the same thing. These brothers and sisters at UnCommon Law are helping folks translate and navigate through a carceral system to help our brothers and sisters find freedom. And I certainly think that is worth you digging into your pockets a little bit more to support them.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I couldn't have put it better. Thank you all. We look forward to seeing you in person next year. Have a good night, folks.